There we go. Okay, hello everybody. This is another episode of Streetwide Politics. And as usual, there was a 7-day period of total batch shittery that you can't even keep up with. Just in this past 24 hours, we've had back and forth. There are tariffs, they're not. Some people are going to get out of them. They're coming to the table to negotiate. And it's people don't like it. There's a lot of turmoil. I feel pretty strongly that historically this is a bad thing. But we have Brad Francis here, who is a good friend of mine, who also happens to be a financially savvy person working for a financial firm and does analysis. And he's here to give his thoughts on the tariffs. So rather than wait around, I'd like to bring Brad in, and it's up to you in a debate-style fashion to tell us why Trump's tariffs are a great thing.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't necessarily think they're going to be. They could, this could fail miserably, 100%. I'm not going to say I don't think it's, it's not necessarily going to fail. I don't know, and that's the one thing is like kind of willing to wait and see. I will also say that as everyone, no one expected what happened last Wednesday, the extent of which they were announced. I don't think that was unbelievable. Everyone was shocked. At the actual, at the overall levels of the levels that were announced, and also just the across the board nature, and then the calculations in which went into determining how who would get what tariff was not what anyone expected. I think and one thing, and this is kind of shifting a little bit away from what I was saying, and I was just reading about this today. I think you're going to get there will be some serious legal challenges as to whether or not these are even going to be able to be, to last beyond, say, 60 days. There are, so I can understand, and I can, I do. There's some things that I think it could potentially be good and useful, but a lot of ways that's not. This is not. This is hard to. This is I think the whole world is mind-boggled right now by a lot of this.
Well, that certainly fits with my view. Everybody's surprised. It's mind-boggling. And just go back to the last time we did this in 1929 with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and it ushered in a depression that took 10 years to get out of. And it took a world war to do it. So the historical looks at it are not good. Trump brings up that he really likes McKinley and his use of tariffs. He was a 2-term president. The first term, he had some of the highest tariffs in U.S. history. And there were 2 depressions in those 4 years. The depressions back then tended to be more runs on banks, and so they would be flash depressions, but they're still depressions. His second term, he decided that the tariffs were not the way to go, reduced them and almost sent them away, and the economy boomed after that.
And I will say, I was listening to the Treasury Secretary, and he was making the rounds, as they say, on all the different weekend shows, and to what I look at him as a very intelligent person. I didn't know a ton about him prior to January when his name started getting floated around for the job, but and he was and he was being. And I believe it was an interview with, I think it was ABC. It might have been NBC. I'm not sure. And where he would mention, yes, by using this format right now, it would be an initial boost potentially in revenue, for revenue, which is a tax increase, as everyone knows. And then, the idea would be, and this is not going to be a 3-month, 6-month thing. You're talking 1, 2, 4 years down the road, replacing that tariff income with income taxes from new jobs and new factories potentially that are built here. And that was that was the way he laid it out and explained it, and I thought it was a very good way of, you know,
You
explaining
mentioned
it.
earlier, you mentioned earlier, Brad, that you could see some positives coming out of this. Is that basically, in your opinion, is that the most likely positive outcome? I guess is bringing some manufacturing sort of jobs back to the U.S.
I mean, I do think there's areas where we can improve upon, um, you know, trade deficits
Mhm.
and yes, bringing
Oh,
back
sure.
bringing some manufacturing jobs back to the country. Uh, you know, there was already some of that underway, as everyone knows, within like say the chips industry and all that. But like,
Right.
you know, you're never going to bring back a lot of the jobs that were, the low wage jobs that we lost. That's just a
Mm.
given, unless there's some sort of form of new change globally as to how people, how people in other countries are paid.
Right.
That's it. And so that's understandable. But I do think you could potentially bring back some higher skilled jobs, and things. One that popped up that they were mentioning today was, that I'd heard was, you know, again, like pharmaceutical manufacturing and those kind of things. Sure, I do think you could potentially bring some of that back.
Well, here's the thing that I found interesting. Nike was on the same shows, and they said it was cheaper for them to pay 50% tariffs than bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. It would be more expensive to hire U.S. workers at U.S. wages, and they would have, either way, the price of shoes are going up if you buy Nike shoes.
Oh,
Yeah.
it would definitely be cheaper for them to pay the tariff, to pay it for sure.
Well, who's paying these tariffs? Is Vietnam and China paying the tariffs?
It's a common. It's like any other. I'm sorry. This has happened in any other time where a tariff has been applied. It's not. It's not just the consumer doesn't pay the whole thing. It's usually a mix of three different sources. It's either it's a mix of the consumer, it's a mix of the importer, and it's a mix of the supplier. Typically, it goes back to supply and demand with any typical industry where, whoever has the least pricing power is going to end up paying the majority of this, of the new tariff, however you'd like to, say it. It's like, if you go into a store to buy, if you go into a store to buy $1,000 washing machine, well, the tariff on that washing machine isn't $1,000. Obviously, it's whatever the, who if going into Best Buy and it's $1,000 and they bought it for $400, well, the tariff's on the $400, obviously, and so it's, you're right off the bat, it's not a direct increase in price, and maybe Best Buy can't increase that price because they know their customer is not going to take on a 20%, increase in price. So it becomes a mix of, well, can we pass on a 3 or 4% price increase, and then sure, the cost is potentially 20% more, but maybe we renegotiate with Samsung for a 5% reduction on their side, and we end up paying. What they said was, if a study I read was the tariffs that were implemented in 2017, it came down to about that, where the consumers paid, I think, consumers ended up paying roughly a 40% of the overall tariff that was applied. And that's, I think you typically find something, and that ends up being a pretty fair number.
I've been reading a lot lately about this shift, what they're calling the new right, and new right economic philosophy, which is actually very interesting because back when I considered myself on the right, free market was basically a religion. You didn't. The free market will settle all this. The free market will take care of everything. And there's been kind of, I guess, this growing awareness on the conservative side that, yeah, free markets are pretty good, but the whole free market principle may not work very well when your competitor is an authoritarian. I'm sorry, am I echoing now? When the free market you're trying to compete in is against a government like China that's an authoritarian one-party state, and maybe that principle doesn't work very well. And which seems to be what some of this kind of has emerged from Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025, all that jazz. I think there may be something that there may be basis for agreement there between left and right that clearly some of this was not working, because the employee salaries in the U.S., overall quality of life, continued to drop. And so I think there's bounds for some agreement. I think the other thing everybody seems to be agreeing on is this is not the way to do it. Is this blanket, scattershot, hand grenade tariffs against everybody? When it seems to me like, and Brad mentioned it, the CHIPS Act enjoyed wide bipartisan support, has been very, very successful at bringing a lot. And I live in North Carolina, where there are new battery plants and semiconductor plants going up all over the place, as a direct result of the CHIPS Act. And it seems to me like we kind of had a template for how to achieve those same goals without causing worldwide chaos, without alienating people that were supposedly our allies. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, Brad, I mean, how you feel about the method.
Oh, well, I mean, I'll be honest. Like when we were just having this discussion at work today, where it was like the idea that you drop you know, the template out, or not the template, you drop the new rules out last Wednesday, and all of a sudden this Wednesday is the day that they're going to be implemented.
Right.
We're like, well, how it just was. That was just very obviously very surprising. To me, a rational way to do this would have been, okay, here's what our plan is. January 1st, 2026, they'll take effect unless they between, and that gives you 9 months to either negotiate with countries or to, for at least for for companies to figure out how they're going to deal with this type of, with what's upcoming. Not just, here you go.
Right.
Next week we start the process. And that has definitely been a surprise, and I don't think welcomed by anyone.
Yeah. And package it with some incentives, with some other, there's all sorts of ways. I think we all kind of agree on the goal. I don't think anybody on either side of the political spectrum would say, no, we don't want manufacturing back. I mean, everybody would like a stronger blue collar back in the U.S.
And
Christine may be disagreeing with me. She was shaking her head a little bit when I said that.
So I would say with two caveats is one, that if service sector jobs had a fair wage, nobody would be arguing to bring manufacturing back. And if companies shared their profits more with their workers in service sector jobs, they would also not be arguing for that. So I feel like, yes, we should want to bring some manufacturing back, high quality manufacturing jobs, because for national security and supply chain reasons, we do need to be able to make some stuff here at home that makes sense, and those are good jobs for people. But when we have to have unions, and that's the thing, is that if we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs with no unions and like not looking in that direction, then we're going to end up being like China. So I think that it needs to be like a policy package, like, yes, careful tariffs, yes, bringing some manufacturing back, but also like an aggressive focus on workers' rights. And I feel like unless you have those three elements together, either of the, or I should say any of those three could get out of control.
Agreed. But we can all agree that going in with a sledgehammer was probably not the way. We would have preferred that this be done.
The thing is, Trump said that's exactly what he was going to do.
Yeah, he did.
And it's like I've been saying all along, I believe every word he said he was going to do, which is why I'm very fearful going forward, because when you look at Project 2025, there's only really one thing left to do. And that's to declare martial law and put U.S. troops out in the streets. And he's so far done everything there. That's the last thing.
I think my biggest concern, just to bring it back to the tariffs for just a moment, is that my concern here is that lasting damage has been done that we cannot repair. And, I think the stock market will eventually bounce back. Investors will see bargains, in depressed stock prices. I think trade wars will happen, and those will eventually smooth out. But I was really, really struck by this news story, and I don't think any of the media outlets have been paying enough attention to it, that Japan and South Korea and China are working on the details of a free trade agreement. And India has expressed interest. Vietnam has expressed interest. And the stated intention among all these countries is to move more of their trade away from the U.S., where it's volatile and unstable. And they might see lower returns, but I'm sure Brad would say there's an awful lot of investors out there that are very interested in stability and consistency, and really want to avoid volatility. Canada is investigating membership in the EU and also talking about strengthening their trade ties and exports to China, and away from us. And I think I'm afraid that's the genie we're not going to be able to put back in the bottle. I think that's what's gone and will never come back, is the kind of confidence of us, the U.S. as the dominant economic player in the world. We're going to be seen as unstable and risky for a long, long time to come. And there's an awful lot of these countries, I think, have learned the lesson. And by the time we get all this straightened out, I think they're going to be very interested in trade with each other and not very interested in us. Because, we've kind of demonstrated the fact, yeah, maybe somebody else gets elected in 3 years and 10 months and, they straighten all this out. But, I mean, what kind of confidence are you going to have that that's going to stay the same, that in a couple of years it's not going to flip back to the same script? And I just feel like we've burned a bridge here that I don't think we're ever going to be able to rebuild.
I think countries will want to do business with us as long as we have 330 million people still willing to spend money.
I agreed. Yeah, I mean, we're still going to be a very big, pretty wealthy market. I just don't know that we're going to be their priority anymore.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is you look down and you think that as being wealthy as we is, we're going to be the primary market. But I look at it, a lot of the stability is going to be in the political arena because we're showing that we can't be trusted as an ally.
Right.
And I think that's actually more important at this point, because even if somebody that's not Trump is elected, this next go around, the problem is you had 77 million people vote for Trump this last time, and they're not going away.
Right.
And in fact, the math is looking at it's going to be more difficult for Democrats to regain power because between California, New York, Illinois, and I think maybe Ohio, they're losing. Those 4 states are going to lose 12 congressmen.
Right.
The way things are shaping up for the next census.
So best case scenario, we end up with gridlock again.
And, unless there's a wipeout, coming up, because,
Right.
What happens is catastrophic between now and then. But, it's like, we're talking several political lifetimes to get just to even 2026.
Right.
In fact, considering that he's only been here, 2 months, it's like it's been 10 years already. So.
And I think, I also really agree with Brad's point that I think this is going to bring some incentive back. And, this is kind of my side of the coin, is on the, construction and development end of things, to bring some manufacturing and some factories back. I honestly, though, my concern is that, companies don't just dip into the rainy day fund to build a new factory. They get loans for that. And it's a very, very tough market for that. And they don't happen overnight. When you're talking, Christine's got a great point about the quality of the jobs we're talking about. A pharmaceutical plant, even in times when capital's pretty freely available, from development to actually cutting the ribbon and start cranking out aspirins or whatever, you're talking about 6 or 7 years. It's just not something that happens quickly. So even if we see some positive outcomes out of it, I think it could be so far down the road, I'm not sure it'll matter.
Well, here's an example I'll give. It's like the Ford company's been building a battery plant about 50 miles south of Louisville on I-65. It's a massive complex, can't miss it if you drive down the interstate.
Mm.
They've been working on it over 5, going on 6 years now, and they're probably still a couple of years out. I used to work as a engineering intern for GM back when I was in college, and I can tell you, just listening to the senior guys talk about how long it takes to get. Well, I mean, one is GM, so everything takes longer with GM. But for anything that if you're talking about something that's a greenfield, which is you're starting from raw dirt to build a plant and do all that. I mean, 5, 6, 7 years is about right. I mean, if you look here just at the TSMC plant that's out here on I-17, which is massive, massive. And it's been going for what?
3 years?
Oh, minimum. Well, 3 years building, and probably three or more years land acquisition, right away, doing all the impact studies, all the stuff that we do with modern building. So again, those are good jobs out there, and and TSMC said they're investing another $60 billion on top of the 100 that they've already put in. So there's going to be for my kids and their kids, those are going to be that's going to be a nexus of really powerful economic development, and a driver for everything.
I've got a friend who's a big Trump supporter. We were actually having a similar discussion about manufacturing capabilities, and his point, which has some validity to it, is that he believes Trump and the more Republican-controlled state governments will be cutting a lot of the red tape and the permitting issues, environmental impact statements, and all that jazz that's required to build a building. And he's right. About that. I suspect that they probably will, and that'll be part of kind of the incentives for companies that are bringing some manufacturing to the U.S. The thing is, that's going to trim, okay, maybe a year, honestly, a year and a half. The reason why buildings take so long to build is because they're cheaper to build that way. It's cheaper, believe it or not, to build it slow. You can accelerate any project you want, but the faster you want to go, the more the costs come up, the more labor you need, which becomes a huge challenge, especially in the current immigration environment. So the more labor you need, the more overtime gets worked, the more heavy equipment you need, so you don't have people standing around waiting on things to move, which is a huge waste. So I deal with this all the time in my job, which is basically, sure, we can move it fast and build it faster, but it's going to cost you a lot more. So the reason why jobs on the interstate take so long, highway jobs, building a bridge, putting up these factories take so long, is because that's the most cost-efficient way to do it. The ADOT, in your case, Doc, would love to have that highway a lot faster. But this is the budget they got, and so if you're going to build it for that, it's going to take longer. And Samsung here in North Carolina, or Lightspeed in North Carolina, they'd love to have their battery factories and their chip factories up and running faster. But it just, the prices increase like crazy when you start trying to accelerate schedule, and that's reality. That's not something that a Republican government or a Republican president can wave their hands and make go away. Those aren't regulations. That's just kind of the reality where the rubber meets the road.
Well, from my standpoint, the thing that seems the stupidest about these tariffs are Canada supplies 80% of our lumber. Mexico supplies about 80% of our cement. And in fact, I think every major cement company in America is now owned by Cemex out of Mexico.
Right. Not to mention the workforce.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think they opened up protected lands for logging in the United States in one of these flurries of executive orders.
Yeah, it's true. Some of the National Forest Service lands are so the way The way it works right now is the Forest Service manages these forests, and they grant permits for a certain percentage to be logged each year. And that's calculated, to be sustainable so that this will have time to regrow before we come back to it. And yeah, I think what they were told to do is to double the number of permits that were being issued. I don't, so in effect, that would be doubling the amount of land that they're allowed to log each year. But the problem is most of the land that was left for logging is not. It was probably left that way because it wasn't great for development, and the trees that are there are not always that great anymore. That's one of the reasons why Canadian lumber is so popular, because they have, a million miles of untouched forest, undeveloped land. So there's a quality versus quantity issue that comes up with that when you're talking about Forest Service lands. So yeah, that's one of the things I think could potentially ease, especially if we're talking about residential construction, which is where an awful lot of that wood goes. Your factory's not going to be made out of wood, though. Your factory's going to be the concrete from Mexico, like Eddie was talking about, and steel, which I'm not sure where steel's coming from now. But it's fixing to get more expensive.
I heard on the radio the other day that actually from China, if I'm not mistaken, and that the steel industry in the United States, that was like one of the common sense tariffs that I wish I could remember the program I was listening to, but they said, like a good strategic tariff would be steel, because China's been undercutting our steel industry for years.
Sure.
Or something along those lines. And I feel like something like that does make sense, just to level the playing field, because we do want to retain the capacity to be able to do that here.
Right.
We don't want to put them out of business.
Right.
So, yeah, a nice common sense tariff would have been nice.
That's one of those industries. Well, that's one of those industries where China undercuts us, not just strategically, but also because they don't have any of the pollution or controls or environmental controls in place. And steelmaking can be a very nasty business.
I don't think there would have been a lot of pushback in general if these were truly reciprocal tariffs as they were originally, pledged to be. If again, the one that everyone always leaned on was, okay, if the European Union's charging us 10% on our cars and we're charging 2.5%, if we matched that, then I don't think everyone would have minded what was rolled out.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, that was not what was rolled out, and
there
were. I do see some of what they were also talking about as far as not just direct, again, that way of like a direct 10 for 10 type of tariff. One of the things was, again, the barriers to entry and trying to eliminate barriers to entry, within, and that is something where you're applying a monetary number to something that's not a deal with a barrier to entry that doesn't have a monetary figure. So it is a difficult kind of give and take from that standpoint. The third one today that I heard was that when we put the tariffs on in China, again back in 2017, was that they then started the route through Vietnam and other countries,
right.
Just so that in Mexico, it was Vietnam, Mexico, and there's some other countries, so that to avoid the tariff. And
right.
So that was part of, again, the thought process behind not straight reciprocal tariffs. And
yeah. Not completely. Well, that was also the reasoning behind the. I saw it on one of the Sunday news shows where the interviewer challenged the guy pretty directly on why they included the islands where there's nobody but penguins living. Yeah.
I watched that right before I came here, actually.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
And that was, why are they? And he said just that. He's like, we need to do it. They wanted to include the entire, everywhere potentially in the entire world where someone might try and reroute through just to avoid the tariff. And I was like, okay, well,
I think that was a blunder and kind of a bad excuse.
After,
you're right.
You can try to cover that up.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to see China, routing all their steel through a little penguin-infested island in the South Pacific somewhere.
It'd be kind of funny to watch.
Although in that kind of same strain of thought is during that time, since we saw those China tariffs in 2017, we saw a lot of, or maybe just one or two companies, Temu and Shein, kind of exporting that shipping loophole where they could get away with not paying tariffs by, making sure that everything was super, 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 super cheap. And they were becoming very competitive to the point where Amazon got scared and came
Right.
out with their own version
Right.
of Temu. So now that loophole has been closed. But also to bring it back to what you were saying about the red tape, it's interesting, that there's definitely that want from, Republican governors and stuff like that to be able to eliminate red tape, to do more construction and more projects. And that's kind of the same thing that Ezra Klein is saying in the abundance agenda that they've put forth, is that we have some antiquated, like environmental protections that were from when we had different environmental concerns, and that maybe for certain projects it would make sense if we had less of those. So I feel like that's another thing that maybe there could be kind of an overlap that people could come together on, is that everybody kind of agrees that, especially when it comes to housing, it would be great if we could build stuff quicker.
Well, it's it's one more symptom of being stuck with a dysfunctional government since the 1980s. I see this a lot at work because I deal with, health and safety regulations, most of which were written in the 60s and the 70s, and almost none of which are relevant to the equipment and the technology and the techniques that we actually use to build things now. And a lot of those things would have been changed, but everybody's got to draw a line in the sand, and this is the hill they're going to die on everything, and nothing can be changed. Nothing can be, if you're willing to compromise, negotiate, and try to come to a more reasonable solution, you get hammered from both sides. Politicians from the left, on the right, you're a rhino. On the left, you're a sellout, or whatever they call it. And this is the kind of thing we used to be able to deal with, we've lost that ability, and we've talked before on this program about the reasoning behind that and why things became so polarized and everybody's in their corner following this more like it was a sport than actually politics now, and it's my team, ride or die, kind of stuff. But it's not productive. But you're absolutely right. You would think in a functioning democracy, these are the kinds of things we could say. Okay, we don't agree over here, but we do agree on this. This could use some tweaking. What it's become was not what we intended. We could do a little adjustment here. And when people like us sit around and have a conversation, that all seems pretty reasonable. But as soon as you put it on Fox News and MSNBC, then it becomes unreasonable.
I was glad to hear you just say that, because one of the things that truly has bothered me about politics in general lately is how it feels like politics aren't sports teams.
Yeah,
I mean, that shouldn't,
right.
And that's not what this should be about. I'm like, it truly, I'm like, I never thought, I would never think of, to me, like, the whole idea of wearing, clothing or whatever for someone
Sure.
that's a politician, when it's not actually, I don't know, election season.
Right. Right. Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. Well, I don't know if you remember Deflategate, but I have some friends who are, I have some friends who are Patriots fans.
I lived in Massachusetts at the time. And I'm not a Patriots fan.
Okay, gotcha. But so you know that if you were a Patriots fan at the time, the only acceptable position was absolute denial that anything ever happened in any way, shape, or form whatsoever.
Yes.
That's become politics. Everybody's a Patriots fan, but it's of their side or, the other side. And to say, well, okay, those guys have a good idea there. That may be something that we can work on. It's betrayal now in politics, and you will be crucified for it.
And to what you were saying earlier in a different way, about us not potentially being the focus of other countries because of instability.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us honestly to the $37 trillion that we owe.
You're absolutely
right. As a nation, and like, we've got to figure out a way to, I mean, we're not going to work that off for quite a while, but at least to close that $1.8 trillion deficit, there has to be done.
Somehow or
Yeah.
other, it has
Yeah,
to be.
and you can't just stand on one side or the other and keep saying do it. I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that,
Right.
and I don't see anyone willing to.
No, because what's going to happen is we will have to raise the corporate tax rate. We will have to tax billionaires, and we'll also have to trim some services, and we'll also have to trim some benefits, and we'll also have to trim the military to make that happen. No politician can say that. All they can say is the other guy's got to give something up. I'm not going to. I think we all know that's the reality, but I don't. Once again, we come back to the discussion about whether or not we have a functioning democracy.
Well, what it comes down to is that you've got your three biggest drivers of the budget are Social Security,
Right.
healthcare,
Mhm.
and the military, and those are all, 10,000 volt, third rails in American politics. And
Right.
anybody that says they're going to do anything about it, you're going to fry your career. Yeah. And just I'm going to tangent here for a second, because there were the demonstrations, protests, whatever you want to call them over the weekend,
Yeah.
and that's where you're starting to see people finally saying, you know what, I may only get $1,500 a month from Social Security, but I'm not going to. I paid into it my entire life. Better get it back to me. And that's the thing that you're getting anger out of people that normally don't pay attention and don't get angry.
Right.
And that's where, if that sets off, every politician in Washington is playing with time because they don't take that into account. And from my standpoint, I'm waiting for some Republicans to wake up and say, in game theory, the best thing you could do is to say, go the opposite way. That's why I look at Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They figured that out early. Now, they lost seats early. But if you're playing the long game and the Trump's going to go away, something's going to rise into place, then, who and what is going to come up after that?
I know who it's going to be. Who's been waiting in the shadows this whole time?
Is it Al Gore? Oh, Mitt Romney.
It's Mitt Romney. No, I'm serious. If you notice, when they did that vote-a-thon the other night, who were the two senators that broke with the Republicans to do the little symbolic protect Medicaid measure? Utah. Utah and Florida are two states that have their own kind of Republican Party machines that are, like adjacent to the MAGA movement, but kind of, especially since DeSantis broke with Trump, they have like their own thing going on. And I truly think that Mitt Romney's been quietly counting his money in the shadows, just kind of waiting until all this calms down to come back in and be like, do you miss me? I'm so normal, remember?
And boring and tedious. Yeah, he does have the market cornered on boring and tedious. Well, you may be right, though, honestly, because one of the things, Doc and Harry and I talked about pretty often was the reason that I see for maybe some optimism, this is prior to all the tariffs and meltdowns, is that it's very much on the right a cult of personality. It's wrapped up around one person, and this is not a particularly healthy person that's pushing 80 years old. And when he's gone, I don't know who holds that weird coalition together. To be honest with you, it's certainly not Chinless, whatever his kid's name is. It's not Rubio. It's not J.D. Vance, for heaven's sakes. Who's got all the personality of a two-before. I think there will be opportunity there to either try to patch together some kind of a arguably non-crazy right, but I also think there will be opportunity for a more populist Democrat with a stronger economic message on the left to capture a lot of that coalition that's going to come unglued, because it's got all the hallmarks of a cult in the sense that it's really wrapped up around one person. It's not a position or a policy or a philosophy of governing or anything. It's wrapped up around one person, and whatever he says today is what we're going to do. So I do think there's an opportunity there, but unfortunately I think a lot of damage is going to be done while we're waiting for Mitt to take his chance.
Mid 78 already. I just looked.
Ooh, goodness, man, mid 78.
Give us your thoughts on that.
Well,
Give us your thoughts on what Ken just said.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think a good portion of the country, myself included, has come down to you're voting for, this has been for a while now. I would say as they say, the lesser of evils, and I don't mean evil in the
you're voting against something, not for something.
You're voting, yeah. You're trying to, what's the, and that's where I think the Democratic Party's got a lot of work to bring back the people that they lost, because yes, while there's a slug of the Republican voting base that is just voting for one person.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously quite a big shift this time around in a large portion of people that moved to that person, not because they necessarily wanted to vote for him,
right?
But they wanted to vote. They voted against
mm-hmm.
and against the strong. But like they didn't see the other side as a viable option either,
right?
Or, and that's really
that's valid. And we've said often in here that the biggest failing with the Democratic Party is that they have completely neglected and taken for granted kind of their blue collar base, and with the legitimate economic concerns that those people have. And they got to get, and I hate to say it, because he couldn't get through the primaries, I think Bernie Sanders could have talked to those people. He was talking about a message to that blue collar base. And I think we need I think if the Democrats have a chance of grabbing some of that coalition when it sort of comes apart, when Trump's no longer around, I think they need somebody with a Bernie kind of message that is very much an economic, populist, blue collar message is what's going to attract some of those folks. And I don't know right now in the Democratic Party who's really equipped to do that.
The one who can win 4 years from now is Shapiro, in my opinion.
Oh, interesting.
I thought, because quite honestly, if they'd handed over the reins to him in June rather than to Harris, I think he wins. He wins Pennsylvania, and then all he's got to do is flip one other one, probably Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's over.
May have had a better shot anyway.
Oh, he had a much better shot at winning.
Yeah, I can see that. I was hoping for Mark Scott, but I don't think Doc's a big Mark fan.
I don't even know who he is.
The astronaut.
Okay. Yeah. I truly don't know who he is.
Got it. Well, unfortunately, he's not much of a firebrand in terms of being a public speaker either. But the Democrats haven't had anybody that could give a good speech since Obama, to tell you the truth. He could really deliver a speech. They haven't had a really good. Although I guess, what was the guy's name who did the filibuster? Cory Booker?
Oh, Booker?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah. It didn't seem to achieve anything, but certainly got a lot of attention. I guess maybe that's what it was intended to achieve.
I think if the Democrats had a true primary this last time around, Booker would have had a chance.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
And again, he probably wins if he guarantees. Well, he definitely. I think most people would have won if it was against Trump.
Well, and I will say I don't think Harris was a terrible candidate, but I think she was very closely linked to Biden, and a lot of that, her being responsible for what people perceived as negative about the Biden administration. I don't know that she was ever going to get out from under that accusation.
Oh, I think that she wasn't. I think people saw through the idea that she truly didn't seem to be able to answer a question unless it was on a teleprompter.
Yeah.
I think some of that, though, is because her campaign really reined them in a lot, her and Tim Walz. I think that first week or two, they came out really strong, and they were kind of really being themselves. She was letting loose a little bit more. Then all of a sudden, she laughed weird once, and Tim Walz made that joke about the couch. And then the Biden people, who were Kamala's campaign infrastructure, were like, no, we have to rein it back, like show less, be less, do less.
And
And
they were
I
playing it
think that
like
was
they
to
had.
her detriment.
Well, they were playing it like they had a strong lead,
Yeah.
which they never really had. But when you have a strong lead, you don't want any gaffes. Don't slip up. Don't say the wrong thing. Don't say something that will be in the headlines tomorrow. And you're right. They were playing it very conservative and controlling them very strictly. And
They went back to the basement strategy.
yeah, so. Hindsight's easy. Armchair quarterbacking and all that. After we know who won, I guess it's easy to take those shots. But yeah, I think you could. A lot of Democrats, I think, would acknowledge now that was probably a mistake.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it that, you look over the past 10 years and, you've got this corporate gerontocracy, and I think it's on both sides. But I mean, when you look at Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, it's pretty hard to go around. But, you've got a party that's, buying for people that are 60, 70, 80 years old. And I think when you look at what happened over the weekend, there were a lot of people that got out there because, there was that whole 60s protest stuff in the late 60s. But, there were a lot of millennials out there because they're the ones that are going to be buried and run for not being able to house and stuff. The biggest thing the Democrats need to do is quit virtue signaling, because you get in these catfights about you're wrong, no, you hurt my feelings. It's like, just grow up. It's politics. I can't promise every group everything because then you can't overlap circles. And that's the problem is that all these silos and there's silos in the Democratic Party, and a lot of those circles don't even come close to overlap. So you promise something to the Jewish vote, you piss them off Palestinian, vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that regard, there's going to be something someplace in the middle. Those type of issues, and you're going to need younger politicians to step forward. And I think you're seeing that now. I mean, it's like, here, just an easy one is my district. There are already half a dozen people that have announced that are going to run in the Democratic primary. And so, and I wouldn't be surprised before it's over, 10, 12.
Well, if they're not going to get motivated now, they're never going to be.
It's true. I think, people have been really kind of enjoying what Tim Walz has been doing. He's been doing his own little, town halls and rallies and going out there, being authentic, making jokes, talking about the gripes that everyday people have. Like, I think people are really craving authenticity. They're tired of people recognizing norms in situations where things are not normal. And I think also in the House, there's a few people who are emerging as very good speakers. Jasmine Crockett is somebody that, like, when she speaks, like, people stop and listen. Like, she's very, very compelling, and she reaches a broad demographic of people. She's from Texas. She's Black. Her dad is a preacher. You can totally tell her dad's a preacher because she has that sort of, presence and stuff. AOC, she's another one. Spanish is the second, I think, either the most spoken language in the United States or the second most. But a lot of people speak Spanish, and I feel like there's all of these little pockets and, communities across the country that will find her relatable, will find her aspirational, somebody that they can really look up to. And I don't know, I think that the Democratic Party should consider a ticket that maybe had like a blend of somebody like a Tim Walz or an AOC or a Jasmine Crockett for vice president, because they're they're of that generation, and they're smart, they're politically very savvy, and they know how to win elections, and they know how to speak to people, they know how to get people to turn out. And I think Tim Walz kind of covers he's relatable to blue collar dads across the country. There's so many people, and I love that he's imperfect. Like, I love that he got like a DUI and like turned his life around and became the governor. Like, I think that there's so many people that would be like, wow, that is an authentic, down to earth story. Like, they like Donald Trump because he was rough around the edges. And I think that they're starting to realize, like, okay, yeah, he's rough around the edges, he's a contrarian, but he's a billionaire and he's not my friend. I could kind of have all of that spiciness that I need right now in this moment without all of that baggage.
Right.
So, I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in order to achieve that, you've got to take the ropes off of them a little bit, let them be who they are, as opposed to a canned, processed, campaign advisor's perfect, version of a candidate. And you can't, you got to get the Democratic Party old guard out of their way. Because for so long they have sabotaged and suppressed, anybody that was a threat to the old guard, and kept them down, kept them out of the spotlight. And I don't know if that stops or not. I hope so, but I don't know if they've learned their lesson. I'm just not seeing a lot of signs from what I guess I would call the old guard, that they understand yet where they messed up.
Well, that's where you just have to take the old guard and take them out back and shoot them. And it's like, they're not going to give it up voluntarily.
No, that's true. Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing that is like Nancy Pelosi as a legitimate person running against her in the primary. And I think you need to have that. Also, I think that's going to be helpful because that's going to put part of it. You have a choice. I mean, it's like here in the state we have Alva who've been there for almost 30 years in one district. He puts himself up for re-election knowing he's got stage 4 cancer. And since January, I forgot how many votes he attended for. And so, now seeing, all the politicians saying, oh, we're going to have that legal for Alva's daughter. Like it's a hereditary. I say bullshit. And that type of stuff is just killing.
Yeah.
Politics. That you get this idea. Our stab at royalty is that if you have some politician for a long time, the family movement actually takes over.
Right. That is corrosive.
That's what it sounds
Didn't work for Kennedy's, doesn't work for me on the other side either. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if we start making that a tradition, we're going to end up with the princelings, little Trump 1 and Trump 2, and Barron. We do not need a political dynasty. It's time to move on.
Please don't.
Princelings.
No.
Well, guys, we're running up close to an hour here, so we'll take around one start with Ken, and we'll let Brad have last word here. So, Ken,
last word from me. Oh, goodness. I think my last word was going to be my concern about the about countries withdrawing from us, to tell you the truth. And I make it a point to listen to the BBC World Service every day, and just because I like hearing news from somewhere outside the U.S. borders every once in a while. And I think that's where I kind of get the idea that our mainstream media doesn't seem to be covering that focus enough to me, and that impetus to move away from the crazy, loud, unpredictable neighbors that we've counted on as trade partners for 40 or 50 years. And I think it's the same way with defense. I think we've seen benefits, upsides and downsides to the U.S. just in terms of the influence that we've been able to wield. We tend to draw, just for sake of conversation, a convenient line between economic policy and military policy. But where they overlap is economic involvement is influence, and influences is military. And I think we're going to lose that. I think some damage has been done, and I think we can about face. I think some of this stuff can be negotiated away. I think some of it's bluster, and will probably be toned down when kind of reality sinks in. But this is the first thing from the Trump administration. Everything else, I felt like, yeah, this is bad, but it could be repaired. This is the first thing that I've seen from this administration where I thought permanent damage has been done. Canada will eventually forgive us for the jokes about being a 51st state. Greenland will eventually forgive us, because they know that's Trump's thing and nobody else wants Greenland or understands what he's talking about. But I just think this economic shock is something that's is probably not going to go away, and is for decades to come is going to create problems for us, and were completely unnecessary. There were other ways.
Christine?
I'm kind of on the same page with you, Ken. I think that there's going to be lasting damage. I think if we can nip it in the bud and kind of take some corrective measures to mend fences, and also just, kind of do more for the people at home too, because everybody in the United States has kind of been on this economic roller coaster, like first with the capricious tech layoffs, then with all the layoffs of the federal workers. Now cost of living is going up even more. So I think that it's going to take a lot of work to repair our image to the rest of the world, but also it's going to take a lot to build back trust, I think, from the American people, because we just keep getting burned.
Okay, Brad, you're up. You get the final word.
First, thank you for having me today. This has been enjoyable for sure. I will say, from the standpoint of tariffs, I do, to Ken's point, I think they will be kind of eased and find a happy medium based off of what initially came out, and I don't think they will 100% go away this time as just a as a trade, or I should say, as kind of a threat more than a threat just to renegotiate. But I do think, unless they do potentially go away from a legal perspective, and I do think that's a distinct possibility. I also, from the tariff perspective, will this slow down growth? Well, yes, of course. Will it send us into a recession? Don't know. I honestly, it's maybe not. It's up in the air. Quite honestly, if you really get into the economic side of things, we could make a good argument for the fact that our growth in the last couple of years has not been anywhere near what it's been published at, because of what we've borrowed versus what the actual growth of the nation. There has been, to your point, there has been some damage done, but I don't think it's irreparable. I think everything is. I think all fences can be mended.
I hope you're right. This is one of those areas where I sincerely hope I'm wrong.
Been very nice. I'd like to invite you back. So we'll have to work out the echo issue. It's like we're both sitting in the same room, so I think that's got something to do with it. So.
Gotcha.
And a week from today, we'll see what else happens. I mean, my God, it's like I'm afraid to watch the news. I hear that from a lot of people.
Agreed.
So anyway, thank you for being here with us, and we'll see you next week.